Hey, this is Jordan with Framing the Red. You're listening to the Nonsense Chronicles with Doug and Rob.
Hello and welcome to the Nonsense Chronicles. This is Doug Sassery, and as always, I am joined by
Rob Mendiola.
Good evening, Rob.
Good evening, Doug.
It's
been crazy, man.
It's been
a good day, though.
It's a good,
alive and kicking.
It's a good day. You know, this December is like nonstop. Man,
yeah.
You know, there's like, 31 days in a month, and there's about 30,000 things that go into a calendar in December, and it's usually when we're cleared out. You know, all the sales for the holidays are done. You're already putting stuff forward for, next year already. I've already done that. But for some reason, man, just things pile up in December. And if you have to drive to get anywhere, it's insanity.
Yeah, I'm sure sales, retail, that kind of thing all gets crazy. But that's a good thing, right?
That's a good thing.
Because that means people are spending money. And
that's good. Yeah,
then you're making money.
But, when you're driving anywhere, I look at it this way. I have a policy. I don't like to be in certain parts of town after 3 o'clock because it's insane because of traffic anywhere around a large city. And, basically my policy is anytime after Thanksgiving to the end of the year, or to Christmas at least, it's basically 3 o'clock traffic everywhere. Every day at 10 a.m., it's the same thing.
Well, right now we're not in traffic. And what do we got? What do we got going on, man?
Well, today...
This podcast.
We're bringing back our most popular guest ever.
Awesome.
Detective Jason White of Tulsa Homicide. How you doing, Jason?
I'm good. Honored to be here.
Man, we are glad to have you. We thought we would. I mean, there's more than a few subjects we could go on, but I thought that we should do cold case because, man, so many people are interested in cold case.
It's a big thing nowadays.
It is, and there's with podcast and then TV is filled with. I mean, they have so many different.
I think with just all the new DNA technology they have, and and stuff, it just fascinates people. I think.
Yes, it does, and we have someone who's an expert on this kind of stuff, man, and. Jason, I guess the first question, this is coming stuff, and I know you're going to add more than I could ask, but the first question I would have for you, when does a cold case officially become cold?
Well, that's a great question. First of all, if I'm the most popular guest you've had, then I'm amongst some great guests that you've had on your previous episodes by far. I mean, amazing guests. Believe me, I've been listening to them.
I appreciate it, man, but people love... they
love true crime. They love true crime. Murder sells.
It does.
So,
it's so sad. I'm just telling our producer that sadly that's something that's just I don't see an end to it. But yes,
I think that the general person are fascinated with the fact that another human being could actually kill somebody.
I think
that's kind of
I think that's a big part of it. Like I said, I'll never understand that part. Like
it's scary that I think everyone's capable of it. Don't you?
Yeah. Well, we are. There's very few species on the planet that actually kill their own, and we just happen to be one of them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of an unfortunate distinction. But
Yes.
So to answer your question, when does a case become cold? That's a good question. We get that a lot when people come through there, and the reality of it is that a case could go cold when the detectives get there and they realize that they don't really have much to work with. I mean, Actually, it could be to the point where you don't even know who the victim is. So that's one of those things. They could really start where you're behind the 8 ball straight out of the gate. So, but in reality, most likely, and most of our, each case is different. I've told you this before, that each case has its own little special story to them. It's a different cast of characters. It's a different everything. And so, one of the most important things is just determining who the person is. And once you do that and do some victimology, then a lot of the story will start to unfold. But technically speaking, to answer your question, a case becomes cold. It could be really at the onset of the investigation, and it could go cold, after all of your leads seem to run out, and then you really don't have much more to work with. And that's what I would constitute as a cold case. Now, I will tell you, and I can't speak for all agencies throughout this country, but in Tulsa, once you get a case, and I think that this is pretty much this is the norm across the country, I would say. Once you get a case, that case remains yours, whether it goes cold or not. That case is going to stay with you until you leave the department or you leave the unit or, you retire, one of those deals, because it doesn't go. I can't just send it down to the cold case room and punt it to them and say, here you go.
Yeah,
it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still have cases that I've had, close to 15 years, and I've been in the unit for over 15, but I've still got a couple of cold cases that date back to almost that time when I came into the unit.
So I know I've heard, let's get some fresh eyes on it.
I was getting ready to say
that. I know me and Doug, we read each other's minds. It's scary.
That is scary.
How does that come to mind sometimes when something isn't moving along and you're like, maybe I should have somebody look at it?
Yeah, I mean, here's kind of the thing. I mean, there's really not a script. When I came into the unit, actually, there would be some cold cases that would be sitting there from the previous detective.
Yeah.
And my vision is that those cases probably should go down to the cold case detective for them to catalog everything, see what is there, see if this is a case that needs to be worked. If it's a case that's kind of like lukewarm, or it's a case that may have some things that they could actually do stuff with, then I think a new detective coming in the door is a perfect option for that, to where they're excited to be there.
Yeah.
They want to prove themselves. They're willing to start. They're not bogged down with all of the other cases, etc. Right. So there are those certain cases that I think that's applicable for. However, I also have this belief that it's not really a good idea to set somebody up for failure the moment they come into the door.
Yeah,
that is true. I think that if you set people up for success and you really give them the tools necessary to be successful when they come in the door, i.e. training and giving them, showing them the ropes before you just hand them this complex case.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of the way I would handle those kind of deals. I've been telling my theories and my philosophy on this for over 15 years, and most of which is not adopted. But this is the way I've discussed it and said, hey, this is the way we really should do it. There was a lot of cases that would just sit there on that detective's shelf. They come in there, they've got these detectives from the previous detective, and then they sit there. And the guy that comes in the door, unless he's got the real initiative to grab a couple of those and start reading through them, they don't have that. They don't have that investment into those cases. Yeah. And what I saw is I would see that those cases would literally just sit there, and they never even talked about them. There was no discussion. There was nothing, unless, of course, a family member might actually call the police department wanting to know some answers in reference to that particular case.
That's what I would imagine would happen. Well, I don't know if it helps.
Does it help? You hear about that?
Yeah,
a lot,
I think I do. I think it helps. I think the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Yeah, I mean, in reality, you get some people that never call. I mean, their family members haven't called since the thing happened. Wow. And then you get others that call all the time. Yeah. And I think I don't think it hurts. And really, in reality, if your loved one was killed, and I say this a lot, and I try to empathize with them as much as possible. I mean, sometimes some of the people that call, they're not reasonable, but as long as you explain yourself as to the reasons why, I think that's probably where we kind of fail as law enforcement, whether we're out on the streets or we're in homicide, is just not explaining to people what you can explain to them, without letting go some of the real secrets behind the case, because we have to keep a lot of that stuff close to the vest, or otherwise people will start talking about it and then it ends out on the streets, etc.
So basically, they don't know how to be helpful to you.
Well, in reality, Rob, I think that what happens is that, a lot of our cases, most of your homicides, I would say, a lot, or at least a lot of them, in many ways, and I'm not talking about your legitimate victims out there. I'm talking about people that are engaged in criminal activity and stuff that they end up getting killed. I think that a lot of the times you really rely a lot upon the families and the relationships with their loved ones to tell you kind of what's been really going on. And if you don't have that connection with them, and if you don't have that rapport built with that family, you're going to be in real trouble. I mean, you have to rely upon these people to tell you what's up. and to give you as much information as possible. And a lot of times these are people that don't have that trust with the police to begin with.
Yeah.
So you just kind of have to work with them through that. And that's why I explained that to them straight out of the gate, that, I need you to help me on this case. And they're the ones that many times they're going to hear about stuff way before you're going to get a call, so you have to have that relationship with them in some way, shape, or form. Yeah, but cold cases they're fascinating anyway, and everybody likes a cold case story. It's like, why is this case cold, especially in today's day and age? And you touched upon it with DNA and stuff, and I think we're going to touch upon that a little bit more in a minute. But when you talk about those cold cases, I think that you got to remember, a lot of those cases have been looked at by the brightest minds in the world of detective work, and not just one detective, but many detectives over many years.
That's true.
And so, when you put somebody into that position, hopefully that person's got the tools necessary to be able to work the case to begin with. And, you really should be willing to listen to the more seasoned investigators, et cetera, to kind of help those new people come along. And every place is different. Like I said, I mean, if you go to Atlanta, for instance, they have a complex homicide unit that are comprised of the detectives that have been there the longest. And that makes sense. I mean, they're complicated for a reason. They're cold for a reason. So I think you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot unless you kind of recognize that a little bit.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, talking about at the start of a case, because there's so many questions. That's why we have to have you back for multiple.
It's a big atmosphere.
Yeah, one of my questions is, and you mentioned this, so now I'm kind of curious. How many times? What's a percentage? I guess when you all have a victim that they're a Jane Doe or a Jane or a John Doe. And for what's the average of that? Now I know immediately you're not going to say, unless it's somebody who's a player on, that's in a lot of times it is. It's somebody that's been in trouble and they're in a situation, whether it's drugs or whatever else, where somebody gets shot. Well, okay, it's Jimmy. I've seen him before, but. How often is it a Jane Doe or a John Doe for any more than a day?
Very rare, very rare. And the reason why is because we have equipment available now to the police officers. We have fingerprint readers that literally we can usually get a fingerprint readout back in 30 seconds or less.
Wow.
If the person has been arrested within the state of Oklahoma. Okay, so very rare. I'd say that where you're going to run into that more often, and I'll just give you an example. I'll give you a case example. Let's say that a female gets a ride from a trucker in Oklahoma and then ends up in Nebraska and dumped.
Yeah.
That is going to be a situation where you're probably going to have a little bit more of a challenge, unless, of course, the person has had their fingerprints taken in a jail. But let's just say, hypothetically speaking, this person's never been arrested, and maybe they have kind of they don't have that relationship with their family, so it wouldn't be unusual for them to be missing for great lengths of time. That might be a real challenge, kind of a thing.
Yeah, it's kind of.
But most of the time, people are killed in the area, in the same city that they live in, etc. Kind of a deal.
Look how fast they caught this New York City guy, that the shooter for this.
Well, Doug and I talked about.
Yeah, that was incredible.
We were watching that.
We were armchair quarterbacks.
Yeah, we were watching that so close, man. Like,
that's just incredible how fast they caught him.
So many opinions on that, but man, as good a job as he did to try and hide, there was always that little slip up, you know. And
he just wasn't as smart as he thought he was, I guess.
No. But
well, we live in a world that's so much. Gil Carrillo, who was the lead detective. I like to throw him down. He's a buddy of mine, and he was the lead detective on the Night Stalker case. Okay, and I've kind of kidded with Gil a little bit. I did, and I just told him, I said, Gil, we would have solved the Night Stalker case in probably 20 minutes.
Oh God,
today, compared
today.
to. I'm kidding, of course. It's not quite that quick, but the technology that exists today is so much further along than it was then. I mean, a cell phone is more the computer in that cell phone is more powerful than the computer that launched us to the moon.
Yeah.
Okay.
No doubt.
Number one.
By far. Yeah.
And just imagine like if say it was gunshots or lasers going across the road. Say it's lasers. Imagine if every doorbell camera or camera in front of a house was a laser. It would be you'd have strings all the way across the road. So it is everywhere you go, you know?
Well, in reality, I wish they would make it like to where you have to register all of those, to where it's the police department can just basically look and see what cameras have been registered in that community to know where to go. These cameras that exist today are extraordinary compared to. I mean, I had a murder years ago that happened at Best Buy, and it was some of the worst cameras I've ever seen. And the ones that are on your doorbell are I mean, they're incredible.
They are
the views that you get. But like I said, and you said something a minute ago, about these John Does and Jane Does. Let's just imagine. Let's go back to that story that I gave you, that scenario where you have a female that might have gotten a ride and ended up in Omaha or Nebraska or somewhere like that. What we could do today that would not have existed 10 years ago is what we could do is we could take that DNA from that individual, and we're hopeful that it's, more than just skeletal remains where the DNA may exist. And then you could send that off to a lab, for like $5,000, and then it'll do forensic. What we can do is we can do some forensic, we can do a couple of things. Number one, we can try to get a composite of what that person would look like at 25 years old based on that DNA. I mean, they'll send you back a picture of what this person looks like.
Yeah.
And so cool. In addition to that, you can literally send that off. And, anthropologists and stuff, they can give you a little bit of an age range. So you could pay a little bit more if let's say it's like a 40 or a 50-year-old person. They can tell that a lot of that based on the bones and the growth of the skull fissures and stuff like that up in the skull. But then you can take that, and then you could do some forensic genealogy. And it's really, it's pretty unusual for somebody in your family, whether it be a second or a third cousin, that has not submitted their DNA to a company.
Yeah.
You might be able to get lucky enough to at least get a family tree to where you're able to start to go back and research who's in that family tree.
Well,
that's probably how they ended up solving the Idaho killer. I mean, that's likely what happened there, and the Long Island killer for that matter,
and the Golden State killer too. I mean,
well, that's the most famous one of them all. So, of course, we as detectives, the technology has gotten to the point now where we don't necessarily have to rely exclusively upon eyewitnesses or people showing up to be a witness. Because a lot of people don't want to do that. They're fearful, those kind of things. We still want witnesses, don't get me wrong. But now we have additional things that could potentially put somebody in a place.
Well, our cell phones,
and fortunate
right?
for us, most people, I mean, it's not just, it's a lot of different things. And that's made our whole, it's a game changer, really. And then not only that, and I talked to Doug about this too, is that, we're getting a machine here in Tulsa that's called the MVAC. And that is I'm not going to say that it's going to solve, I think, I don't know if I mentioned this the last time. We have roughly 300 cold cases that date back to 1968 in Tulsa. And so we have a few that are in the 60s. We've got a number of them from the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, et cetera. But this is the type of equipment that literally it's like they used to use it to, or they probably still do, but it's like a wet vac, and it shoots a solution onto porous materials and clothing and things like that. And then it sucks that up there, and then you can test the filter, and it gives you about a 25 to a 30% greater chance of getting DNA retrieved than the normal traditional swabbing methods. And this is something we're going to get here in Tulsa. We'll be the only police department in the state that has it.
Wow.
And there's a number of these machines located throughout this country. And, it gives us hope. That's the thing.
Is that like the touch DNA type of process?
With the DNA, it kind of the touch DNA, I'm going to say that if you just envision something shooting a solution of liquid into like a rock, and it gets into those,
everything's porous,
the nooks and crannies, and that's right. It gets into there, that sucks that solution up. And then it gives you a better chance than just the traditional Q-tip swab.
Yeah.
Kind of a thing. And so,
awesome.
and like I said, It's not applicable for every single case. I mean, this is probably not applicable for the guy that gets shot at the intersection as the guy drives by, but for the rape murders, for the murders that there's that physical contact, or like a robber reaching inside somebody's pockets to retrieve items.
Yeah.
And most of these cases literally are and I'm not going to, and I've said this before because I was the one that put together the proposal for this. And I told the people that were going to be donating this money, I'm like, I can't guarantee you that it's going to solve 50 cases, but what I can tell you is that I'm highly hopeful that it's going to solve some. And it does give hope to many of these cases. And for the families, that have been waiting for answers for decades, just merely having that possibility of hope.
Yeah.
I mean, that's priceless.
Then knowing that you're actually taking the effort to do it.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah, that's what you want detectives that are working in these units that care.
Yeah.
And I think, that's where I'm fortunate. I work in a unit that I think that by and large we all care and we want to solve these cases, and that's really what you want,
Yeah, let me ask you this, I guess. What's the on these units? What is there a budget or just?
Well, this one was donated. You said, right?
Yeah. Well,
the funds were donated for this one.
I think you said, yeah. Well, the funds were donated for that.
Well, for that specific machine, I mean, you're talking roughly around $50,000.
That's not bad, though.
And it's really not in the world of criminal justice. No. I mean, because everything, when you put police associated with anything, the price goes dramatically up. So that's not really too bad. Plus, that gives you a number of tests that you can do. And the biggest cost of that is actually the equipment itself. And that cost per test, I think per test, we're talking roughly in the neighborhood of $150.
And that's cheap.
Which is that's cheap for doing a test on something. Yeah. So
y'all do a lot of $5,000 tests, don't you? Or is it 5,000?
Well, you can. I mean, we try to. Those are the types of things that we want to make darn sure that we've tried everything else before we could do that.
Yeah.
Because,
okay.
It's just not raining money in the city, but we want to make sure that it's something that's going to be. It's going to be something that we have It's worth it. It's worth a shot to try this. For instance, like there was a case from I think the early 70s, where a little boy was tragically killed. That in that case where we know that there's been contact, that's the type of case that I'm talking about where it's worth a look. But to go about the money thing, we're fortunate here. Money is really not an object with our city. They want these cases solved. They've made it a priority. And so if it costs a little overtime for us to do, working on these cases, if something is worth working it, then the city they've never balked at that, ever.
It seems like there's a lot more confidence in those tests now, seeing all the results that happen throughout the U.S. and abroad.
Well, that and just really the DNA is getting to the point where I talked to a DNA scientist. I'm not a DNA scientist, but I've talked to one of those guys not too long ago, probably last year, and he's telling me that in the next 10 years, look out, man, because it's going to be it's unbelievable. You can't even keep up with the technology. So it's going to be unreal. I can't even. Well, let me give you an example. I'll give you an example. By 2027 in the state of Oklahoma, we are mandated, and we're going to have, which means basically you have to have this, and that is rapid DNA scanners. And the way that they describe it is like if you envision like a trail of blood, where you could take one of these things and you could scan that blood on the ground, and then theoretically you could go in there and scan a person inside of an interview room, and within 30 minutes you can tell if that's a match.
That's amazing.
Between the two.
That's amazing.
Well, it is.
No, I was gonna.
That's military stuff. That's military stuff for you.
Yeah.
That's military technology
that's
that
DARPA.
has now made it to us.
Now, what about like we're talking.
Well, let me tell you this. Let me tell you this real quick, Doug.
Go ahead.
So one of the things that I want to mention. So a lot of people may be listening to this going, "Oh man, I don't know if I like that or not." Well, this is the kind of technology that actually exonerates people too. This exculpates.
Yeah.
This is what I've been on many cases where you're like, I know this guy's got to be the guy, and this is the type of stuff that can eliminate that person. And I mean, how good is that for them?
Oh, I think it's a lot better. than like a lie detector. I think the DNA is
Yeah.
this the bottom line, and there's no getting out of that, you know. So
Well, I mean, and in keeping in mind that DNA doesn't necessarily tell you that that individual killed that person.
or it could
It
be
just tells you that there was that contact, or they were there, or they were
Yeah.
at this location at some point in time. You know, but anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt. You're a chronic interrupter sometimes, Doug. Well,
I
I
am.
just interrupted you, so I apologize.
Dude, I am chronically, and man, there's so many like offshoots of this stuff, and I'm trying to keep it in here because I know I've got some other subjects that I definitely want to cover on a later episode. But now I guess let me ask this question: is there a general handbook for cold cases that that y'all all have studied beforehand, or is it pretty much just let me use the general practice that I've used in solving crimes in the past, and then add a little bit of something to it?
That's such a good question. Well, I can tell you this much: there's plenty of classes that exist throughout this country that dive into cold cases, and our department is no different than most of them out there, where money is scarce when it comes to training. And so therefore, there should always be a couple of things should happen. Number one, the people that you put in those positions, they should be self-initiated self-starters that are willing to put forth and sacrifice their life. Okay. Because that's really what it comes down to. You have to be willing to sacrifice your life in reading and self-taught in many ways. Okay. And I've done a lot of self-teaching.
Yeah.
But there's not necessarily, I'm not going to say that there's necessarily a handbook that you're just going to get handed.
Yeah.
And
I was kind of curious
But
about
now you
that.
could probably get on a Zoom with somebody and that is has more
Well, yeah, and he's talking about these
more knowledge on
continuing
something.
education. I'm sure you have some of these seminars that they have on probably on you can watch on Zoom or watch on some kind of YouTube something presentation.
Oh yeah. Hey, listen, I watch Cold Justice, and that's from your state. That's from Texas. And I watch the heck out of that because that really it's on the Oxygen channel, and it's got Kelly Sigler, I think, and then it's got the lead detective from the Dahmer case, and he's a super guy. I know him. Yeah, she was a DA down in Harris County.
Yeah.
And I'm a super fan. As a matter of fact, I told somebody that knows her, I'm like, well, it's a good thing she didn't show up at this training that I was at down in Texas, or she'd probably need a protective order on me. Because I am just a fan. I'm a fan of the fact that they're really showing you the roadmap on how to solve a cold case. And a lot of it has to do with just getting out there. It's not rocket science. It's literally just getting out there and re-interviewing people X amount of years later. I mean, relationships change. And believe it or not, a lot of these people that are involved in these cases and stuff, they've moved on with their lives. And sometimes they even actually think that these cases were already solved.
Yeah.
It isn't pertained to them directly. But when you start going out there and starting to interview these people, and that's what they really do, they dissect the case, what hasn't been done, what is there, what can we do, and then they dissect and of course they're handpicked. I mean, it's for television, but it doesn't change anything. And I tell everybody that's come into our unit, hey man, if you're thinking about doing a cold case, watch that show, and it gives you the roadmap on how to do them.
That's pretty cool.
And so, no, it is cool because it's right there. I mean, and they've been really successful on a lot of cases. And what they're doing is they're helping these departments that are, for the most part, it's not your large city like Dallas or those kind of places. Those places have been exposed to a tremendous amount of murder. They have a tremendous amount of experience. I'm talking about your mid-sized to lower level, your small town police agencies that just don't have the expertise. And for whatever reason, they kept those cases when in fact maybe they should have actually reached out to people that are more experienced, like the state police in some instances or whatever.
That's what I was going to ask. Yeah, state police and
really on that show specifically, if somebody's listening to this and they are in a small town and they're willing, they want those cases. They can reach out to you. They can get to me. I will give them the numbers for Cold Justice. And they'll work it, and they all of the DNA testing, which could be extraordinarily expensive, like $10,000 a pop, they will pay for all of that.
Yeah, no kidding.
On those types of cases.
Yeah, if it's a great case,
all of that is paid for.
It's interesting. Yeah, that's a good investment. Yeah, I never thought about that.
Absolutely.
Now, I guess that's another question I have. And I think I know the answer to the next two questions I have, but The first one was, how big are cold case units now? It's is that one or two guys? And I guess the question that ties in with that too is there, and I know this answer is probably a no, is there's no such thing as 100% dedicated to cold case, or are there groups, are there units like that? I know that I would assume that you'll have to deal with active case, and then like, okay, maybe Thursday and Friday is your day for for cold case, or maybe if it's a slow day in town, pray that those happen more. But how does that work as far as the size of the cold case unit, and how much time do you get to dedicate, or is that dictated by what's going on in the city that you're in at the time?
Well, I mean, I know in Tulsa we have one dedicated person that is an actual police officer that works in that room, and that's the way it's been since I've been on the police department. Well, maybe when I first got on, there might have been two guys that worked in there, but for the most part, it's been one person, it's just not enough. I mean, really, if you've got 300 cases in there, that's just almost impossible for one guy to deal with just the phone calls from the family members, throughout a year. So I would say that for a lot of them, it's like that. If you go to New York City, I've got some buddies of mine that work cold cases for the NYPD, and they have a whole unit that just goes around and they search for cold cases that are in the different, in New York City, it's a little bit more complex. You have the different boroughs, you've got, different precincts and all this other stuff. And so you have to kind of find out, where do I even go from here? Where are these cold cases, and let's find the ones that are the diamonds in the rough kind of thing.
In
New York, a buddy of mine in New York City, he just solved a case. I'm so proud of this guy for doing it. And it was a case of somebody encased in concrete in the basement.
Wow. Oh, Jesus Christ.
That's
like
crazy.
One of these places, like where a bar was in like 1969 or 1970.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing, he's such a good guy. I love this guy.
Surprised.
But he basically one of the things that he did is he had to figure out who the heck the person even was. And that right there in and of itself was a nightmare. And he spent years combing through school records and trying to find missing people that were possibly that age. And it was the guy's tenacity is essentially what ended up breaking that thing open. But and they recently solved it. I'm trying to get the guy on my podcast. It's just not in that legal point where he can really get into it in depth. But it's fascinating, the amount of work. But to answer your question, generally speaking, I think that for the most part, they just don't have teams or full units that are dedicated to that, unless it's the larger the department, the more manpower possibilities. But for Tulsa, being the 47th largest city in the country, we have one.
Now,
just recently, we just got a grant for $533,000, which allowed for, well, actually, you had to have a second person. And so now they've put a civilian in that second person spot. But so that's at least two sets of eyes that are looking at these cases, kind of a deal on the cold case thing.
Do they bring y'all in, like, say, Jimmy the detective or Jason White the detective? They say, hey, this was your case back in 2011. What can you tell? Do you do some sit downs and stuff like that to fill them in? I know they had the files there, but
yeah, I mean, it depends. There was a case that happened a couple of years ago. The actual case happened in 2015. I came into the unit in 2009, and so when my boss came up to me and he said, hey, I got this message about this case, I'm kind of a Rain Man when it comes to old cases. If it's older cases, I kind of remember them. You know what I mean? The recent stuff, I'm like, man, I don't know. But the older stuff, it seems to have stuck in my brain a little bit better. And so he was like, hey, there's this deal. They're talking about this. They're talking about that. And I was like, oh yeah, that's this case. That was Detective Matt Frazier's case. I didn't go out on it, but I know the case. I've looked at the photos. Do you want me to call her? And he's like, yeah, if you don't mind. So I called her. And when I called this lady, she started telling me some details about it. And I was like, let me call you right back. Because when I started listening to what she had to say, I'm like, oh no, this is legit. She's talking about things that are involved in this case that I remember looking on the photos from years before. And so I called her back. I said, hey, I got my tape recorder going right now. So I wanted to make sure I didn't lose anything that you're talking about. And so that ended up solving that case. I mean, we ended up getting 2 females in custody on that. And that solved a case that was a horrific murder that we had nothing on for many, many years, And so that's, so do I have we talked about a case, Doug, where I talked to you about a no body case, and I talked to you at length about it before.
Yeah.
And in that particular case, there was nothing. I wanted the case. I mean, it was one of those deals where I found that case interesting, and I just kind of took ownership of it, and I started looking into it, and I was able to move the ball forward, with the help of many other people. But, that's the other thing that I really appreciate about where I work is that there's no real restrictions about if you just have this wild hair and you're like, man, I'm just going to grab this book off of the shelf and I'm just going to start looking at it and go from there. Years ago, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, the evening crime shift unit, these are crime scene detectives, and I used to be a crime scene detective back in the day. And they were like, hey, we're really interested maybe looking at this one case. Is there any problem with us doing that? I'm like, no, knock yourselves out. Go for it. And when I told them when they grabbed the case, and they didn't solve it ultimately, but I said, here's what we want to do. I want you to do that. That's great. And I want you to start going through it and cataloging what has been tested, what hasn't been tested, what needs to be tested, who needs to be interviewed, and start going through it with that methodical thinking. I want you to think like that. And then get back with me. And then we started working it kind of together. They were really doing all the legwork and all the hard work. And then I was kind of looking at what they were doing, and we were making some progress on that. And that's on a really infamous double murder that happened here many, many years ago. And I think that just by trying, I mean, look at all the learning that takes place in the meantime. You got detectives that are willing to they're doing stuff. They're submitting lab reports. They're doing, lab requests and stuff. They're doing something that's better than that case sitting up on a shelf gathering dust,
I agree.
And so at a minimum, you may get lucky and you may actually hit something, or you might start interviewing some people and you might get something that's what you were looking for. In a lot of these cases, that's all you're looking for is that little thing that basically breaks the whole thing wide open. And then it makes sense.
So have y'all, I know in my company even, which is finance, we're talking about AI. Have y'all discussed any AI computing to help y'all?
Well, when you talk about AI, I will tell you that Jack the Ripper case, that's a massively infamous case, right?
Mm-hmm.
Jack the Ripper, serial killer in England,
right.
I think is where it was at.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard that they've used AI and they think that they've solved that case, and maybe
Wow.
they have. I mean, it's based on them importing all this information in there, and it's
right.
showing the tendencies of these people and stuff. Do I think that there's a place for it? Absolutely. I'm not gonna be one of those negative Neds. I'm gonna be more of a positive Pat. That hey, you never know. This stuff, it's kind of scary.
It's another part of our technology that's growing, and
oh no,
I don't think we're going to be able to get away from it.
No, I think every industry, no matter what you're in,
Yeah.
is going to have something because it's being talked about. Yeah, trust me.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's definitely benefits with exploring it, and it's going to be the test that's going to come up in court down the line. How did you get to where you're at here? How were we able to get here, and how were we able to connect the dots, and how were we able to show that this person did this beyond a reasonable doubt?
Right.
It's one thing to get somebody in custody based on probable cause. You're wanting to, I'm not interested in just getting somebody arrested. I want to win. I want to, it's not just winning it's not just sending somebody to prison. You want the full story, and sometimes some people it's not justified for them to go to prison for the remainder of their life. There may be more to the story,
Yeah, it's just like it's like the teacher. You remember we went back in math class when they want you to show your work. You can write the answer down. No, you got to show your work. So
that's right.
Yeah.
No, that's a great example of that. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's so funny. I was doing show notes for this before we sat down tonight, and one of the things that didn't make the cut. It's so funny that you bring up the encased in cement thing, because I was going to ask about because cold case, those are the guys breaking out the ground sonar, and then look, he did it all by himself.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that they had to use that to find somebody that was encased in cement, right?
Well, I think that in that particular case, and I'm going off of memory here, I think that they've been doing some renovations in this tenement, or this used to have a bar in it back in
Yeah.
the day. Back in the late '60s or the early '70s, and I've definitely uh, bent his ear over this because I'm like, well, how did you end up coming across this to begin with? Well, they're doing renovations, whether it be who knows what they were doing back to uncover these remains.
God,
But they ended up breaking up this stuff, whether it was a plumbing leak, they were doing renovate, who knows what. But they ended up coming across these bones. They call the cops. The cops go over there. They're like,
yeah.
oh, here we go.
Yep.
We got something. And of course, I think that probably the initial thought was mafia. You got to remember, New York City, your general citizen's not usually breaking up concrete or pouring. They don't have the unions on their
Yeah,
side.
they don't have the contractors for that job. Yeah.
So I think that there was thoughts of that, and I can't remember if there were signs of dismemberment or not. But they, I'll tell you what my personal opinion about NYPD. I really look up to them. Those guys really care, and you would think that with as many cops as they have there, and there's some real all-stars there, and he's one of them. But that's what they ended up doing, and they started looking there. Who lived here at that time? Who's ever lived here? And that's when they started going back and started looking at that. And if memory serves, I think that's when they started realizing, oh, wait a second, this one person had a wife. Where did she go?
Yeah.
And that's kind of one of those deals where that story kind of started and kind of went from there. And
yeah, and I'm thinking that with cold case in my head at least, it's you're so close to solving. It's that one piece. It's like the guy, and I know you're gonna probably know better than me, but I want to say it's Palo Alto, somewhere in California, where the girl went missing. The guy walked her home from the party. Everybody knew.
Oh yeah, no, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. The parents, that some people to this day still think the dad, helped him, whatever, load her in a body, whatever. I don't think they ever found her body, but yeah, they were doing, because the dad had at their property, which I don't think they own anymore. He had added onto a shed, there was new cement, and yeah, man, it just, who did it, but you can't get that. What's that one piece that's going to make the difference, Yeah.
So. I mean, I can tell you right now, I can tell you of an area right now that there's pieces of a body here in Tulsa.
Oh shit!
Where a guy was dismembered. I'm telling you, I know the area, but it's such a wooded area. It's like near impossible. You know what I mean? I already know that the guy's out there. And then there's another one I can think of where there may be, and we searched for a long time, and I still believe the story, where a child might have been from another state, but may have been abused by the parents, killed, and then stuck in the ground. And then there's been a shopping center built over this thing. You know what I mean? And we've actually excavated years ago parts of the floor based on anomalies on ground penetrating radar.
Wow.
And we were unfortunately unsuccessful in finding this person. But based on the story that we were hearing, man, it was like really, really on point,
Yeah.
as to what you would think you would look. I mean, basically a child bound and stuck in a box and buried, and it just, unfortunately, we were able to find that child. But I still, every time I pass by that intersection and I look over, I'm like, yeah, that kid's probably under that building somewhere. It's just a matter of how much demolition are we going to do here on this entire shopping center?
Okay, I'm gonna go off a little bit off, damn it. But I got this question for you. Okay, in the scenario where somebody has been killed and you're trying to solve this, but you have no body, what's the percentage? I mean, in itself has got to be a lower percentage than normally you do have the body. But what's the percentage of the criminal actually ever giving up where the body is?
Well, let's start with the statistical numbers of no body prosecutions in and of themselves.
That's very low.
There's been 599, unless something has happened in the last few months, but 599 no body cases that have ended up in a courtroom in the United States. Okay. How do I know this? I'm not a savant. Okay. But I know the Nobody guy, the guy that wrote the textbook. He's a friend of mine.
Huh.
So he was a guest on my podcast, and I had a Nobody case. So of course I met him that way by inquiring, what do you do when you have a plumbing problem? You call a plumber. Well, when I had a Nobody problem, I called the Nobody expert.
Yeah.
And that's what you should do. You call the people that know. And so anyway, there's been 599 of those cases in the United States. And out of those, they've had an 87% success rate in a courtroom.
Wow.
Of getting a conviction, which is extraordinary.
That is.
When you think about that, because really we're talking about no bodies.
Yeah.
Yeah, because at one time that was like, no prosecutor wouldn't bring the case. Yeah.
Well, that's still the philosophy in many places.
Yeah.
It's less so now, and the reason why is because people are being educated based on places that have tried and they've been successful. And really, in the world that we live in today, it's much more difficult. People leave an electronic footprint of some sort,
right.
Usually, so you can, after so many years, and we've looked at this and we've looked at that, and this person was a person that always Facebooked, and then they never did ever again the rest of their life, and there's never been nothing. And you can show that, and you don't have anything that leads to the fact that this person might be alive. And this is always a tricky area. You know what I mean? It's always tricky because the defense attorneys, they're going to go, our next witness is so-and-so, and then everybody's going to look at the door waiting for this person to come in. And yet they don't, but yet everybody looks for a reason because that's a doubt. That person could still be alive, kind of a deal,
Yeah.
So.
No, you were right about talking about technology. Technology is like a witness now. I mean, the phones, but Jason also told me, and I didn't realize that as much, the newer vehicles, they can track those.
You tracked on so many things now.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's.
Well, yeah, you're right. I mean, it's just, but isn't it, that's good. That's good that it's gotten to this point. There are people that disappear. There are people that willingly disappear. But what was the reason for that? Why? Were they involved in a horrible marriage and he had threatened to kill her? I mean, or was it a situation where this person just took off?
I've got
a couple of relatives right now that, here, I'm a cop, and I've got a couple of relatives that just trying to find out where they live is like near impossible,
Wow.
and literally, and they've just decided they don't want to be a part of the other relatives for whatever reason, kind of a deal.
Yeah.
So, and like I said, and I've ran into this personally, to where I had to find somebody because of a death in the family or something like that. And of course, I get calls from my relatives going, "Hey, can you find this person?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'll try." And I've done that, and it was almost near impossible, kind of a deal. So, but that's what's cool is that we're continually getting better.
Yeah.
But so are the bad guys. I mean, let's be real.
That's
They're getting just as good. And there's every time we make it 5 steps forward in new innovations, then there's other text messaging apps that make it impossible for us, that kind of a thing. And so you're battling with that as well. So we just we have an obligation to do the best that we can, and we try. And there's one case that's a kind of a high profile case here in Tulsa. And the mother, she messages me all the time. I was never the detective on the case, but because of my podcast and I've been in the unit forever, she messages me all the time. And I've told her, I'm like, listen, I'm not saying, and it's, I won't get into the details of the case, but it's one of those cases that it's like, it drives me crazy that this case is still open. I'm fascinated at the fact that we really don't have what we need to be able to identify a perpetrator in this. And I've told her before, I'm like, listen, instead of, she has a tendency, sometimes she'll get a little bit upset with the cops and she wants to know everything. And I've told her, I said, we can't tell you everything because every time we tell you something, then you end up telling somebody else. And the fact of the matter is that sometimes what I need from you, and I've told her this before, and I've told her this more than once, and I'm like, listen, I need you to be a beacon of hope for those other people to not give up hope and to show up at these Christmas tree lightings and the different things that we do throughout the year to be there for these victims' families. And I need you to be that person that's like the role model, the person that's going to keep them positive. And maybe that's what God intended for you to do. I don't know, but it could be a break that happens right now or next week that could break the whole thing wide open. But you have to maintain that hope. You can't be, reprimanding the police department at every turn and all this, that, and the other. We're trying to, we're doing the best that we can with what we've got.
That's just not helpful.
A lot of these families, a lot of these families, when you have 300 people that are 300 families that are, or 300, dead people, you've got to remember that there's one guy or two people that this case is just as important as this number 72.
Right.
And so on. And so, but anyway, it's such a fun, isn't it an interesting topic?
It is
to talk about.
It's very, like I said, and it's just, there's so, we talked about this before a little bit, where there's just so many people. There's these groups online, and I mean, it's just like anything else with the internet. It can go way, way, way awry with theories and stuff like that. But just so many people talk about it. In some ways, it's good, I would assume, because at least it's talked about and that case stays out there. But I'm sure it has.
Seems to me like more women are interested in the true crime stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
well, about 70% of my followers are female.
Well, see, there you go.
So I'm gonna guess that that's probably the case.
Yeah, every time I hear somebody talking about it, it's a female.
Yeah, I mean, we're both married to people that are very interested in this. Yeah,
I mean, if you think about it, you touched upon something. The case that I'm thinking about that you just mentioned is the don't F with cats.
Oh, wow.
And that's when you have your armchair quarterbacks, your couch sleuths that are sitting at home and they're reading about this case, and I gotta applaud them, man. I mean, I couldn't believe the amount of work that they did on that case. They're the reasons for that. They're the heroes. They solved that case for.
Wow.
It's amazing, guy. And, there's some things you do. It's that they can do that police can't do, because there's laws, and sometimes Joe Q Public will stretch it a little bit. I was listening about a cold case yesterday, and I know there's got to be, Jason, there's two different theories. Either you want to keep it quiet and you don't want him to know that that you're getting close to him, or sometimes it's like throw a little cold water on him and see what his reaction is, see if he'll slip up. But I guess it's only so many times you can do that, especially if a case is like 8 to 10 years old. So
and then another, if I'm gonna highly recommend this to your listeners, if they want to watch something that I think is just absolutely fascinating, and I'm kind of obsessed with it, but it's Paradise Lost, and that's about the West Memphis 3. Okay, and I've tried to get in touch with a couple of those defendants that have since been they've been released. They ended up doing an Alford plea, which means that they said that they're guilty, but I'm really not guilty. Yeah. And that's when 3 young people were killed in West Memphis. They were young kids. They were killed in West Memphis, Arkansas. And my point is, what I'm telling you is that when I think about that case, I can remember the police, the lead investigator or the police chief at the time, or whatever the case may be. He's like, yeah, you can come down here to our police department and you can go through the boxes of evidence that you want. I mean, anytime you want. I'm thinking, yeah, me as a detective couldn't go down there, and they're not going to open up their boxes of evidence for me to go through. Come on. So I was like, I do not see that happening, and I don't see a lot of police departments going, yeah, sure, come on down. We're gonna have a get together, and we're gonna let all the evidence, and we're gonna let you choose. But I will tell you, I know some people. I know a crime scene detective in Georgia that they have like wine and cold cases, and they literally get in front of a crowd and they talk about these cold cases and they listen to other people's ideas.
Well, that actually would be a very successful idea for a live audience type event. Yeah, because
that's what they do.
Oh,
they do that.
Yeah, that would be a great idea.
As long as, but the thing that you always have to, and I can't remember. I think it's like, I can't remember what they call it, but I know that they have these events where it's like a cold case sit down, and they go through the facts of the case, and people are in there drinking wine or whatever, and they're getting entertained, and they're talking about them. And I don't know how successful this has been. I just know that somebody, at least one person, that has been involved in these, and it's kind of interesting, and
I think you'd probably bring in maybe one or two people involved, somebody that knew a little something about that case. And yeah, that'd be very interesting, and I'm sure there's people that have followed those cases, for years. There's always going to be a handful that do.
Yeah, and now, mind you, I'm not advocating this. So if my bosses hear this, I'm not advocating that. I'm just saying
it exists.
I'm just saying it exists, and getting people to talk about and not letting go of all the secrets. You gotta keep stuff close to the heart, close to the vest. And the reason why is because if you had somebody from prison that's starting to talk about this case, then you know that information is going to be to that case. You know that it's not been shared. It's stuff that only the killer would know, kind of a deal.
And that's only the killer would know is very important to a lot of cases.
It is. Yeah.
All right. Well,
I did have one question.
Ask that question, Rob.
So I know you're close to a lot of the indigenous reservations out there. Do y'all do any work with them for murders or missing?
Well, the FBI has a special unit that is dedicated to that.
Okay.
And they actually, that's a big deal. That's a really big deal in like Montana.
Mm-hmm.
They're working stuff that's going on here in Oklahoma.
Uh-huh.
And they have a specific amount of FBI agents. Here in Oklahoma, we are all task force officers also with the FBI. So we have jurisdiction to be able to work any of those kind of cases.
Oh, cool.
So, but they have a special unit that's dedicated to that as well. And I know that there's a tremendous amount of missing people that are from the Indian tribes and stuff, and indigenous people, and specifically Montana. Kind of the Yellowstone. I think they kind of touched upon it in one of the Yellowstone episodes. But there is a real issue with that. I don't know a lot about that.
But just in general,
usually
there's still crime, I'm sure, on those areas.
Well, I'll tell you what. One of the things that the FBI has, they have a unit that's specifically to that, or I don't know if it's a specific unit. I know that they have agents that are dedicated to that. Okay. They also have a whole nother area that just deals with serial killers that are semi-truck drivers. Okay.
Wow.
And they literally have a whole different area that studies serial killers that are truck drivers.
Wow.
So that tells you something. That tells you that there is a problem.
Yeah, that's definitely a problem.
That is actually in that area. You know what I mean? That some of those serial killers have a tendency to like to drive trucks.
That's always been the rumor, man. Yeah, it's always.
Doug, don't you like to drive all over the place?
Hey, man. I'm not the one asking about.
Are you volunteering the cheek swab?
Hey, my kids already have me out there on the DNA profile, so yeah, too late for that.
Can't get away with murder these days, man.
Jason, thanks so much for joining us again today, man.
Oh, hey, my pleasure. And Rob and Doug, thank you so much for thinking that what I have to say is important enough to have me on a second time.
Oh, it absolutely is.
And I'm really honored to be on here, and hopefully your guest, or not your guest, but hopefully your listeners find some value in it and they find it interesting.
Oh, I think they will. They ate up the last one, so yeah. That's
I mean, y'all have such a dangerous job, so it's like y'all should definitely be commended for doing that type of
Most
work.
of the time, we're sitting behind a desk. Oh, the dangerous. We show up after the bad stuff has happened.
Oh,
now at this juncture,
I guess that's pretty good.
Yeah.
But we are in rooms, in a very, very small room with some legitimate killers.
Some of the most dangerous people on the planet, right?
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes. But listen, guys, I really do appreciate it, and thank you so much. And
we'll do it again.
It's definitely an honor. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll become a perennial guest over the years.
I think that's going to happen.
Hell
But I want to tell everybody that you can catch Jason on the First 48, and and also Jason, give us a little background before we go on your podcast that you do, man.
Well, it's called Into the Fire. There's every Friday, well, not every Friday night, most Friday nights, 7 p.m. live. I actually do mine live.
Wow.
And if you catch it early on, you can actually watch it, where I have the guest and you can see me and the guest. But every Friday night, or most Friday nights, it comes on KGRA Digital Broadcasting, and I was posting them up on my Detective Jason White Facebook page, but it got suspended for unknown reasons. So that's kind of locked in right now. I'm trying to get behind that, but you can still watch them over there on KGRA. You can go to Rumble, you can go to Spreaker, Apple, Spotify, all of that stuff. But if you want to watch it, you can go to Rumble, and I've got 33. Well, my 33rd episode is going to be coming on this Friday. And then I'll tell you somebody interesting that's going to be coming up on the 20th of December. I think that's the 20th. And that's going to be a guy that I didn't even realize how much of an expert this guy is. But he's basically like world-renowned fire death investigator. I mean, this guy was from LA Fire Department. And he's like, what do you want to talk about? Do you want to talk about serial arsonist, or do you want to talk about fire deaths? And I'm like, I want to talk about it all.
Yeah.
I mean, how fascinating is that? And this guy's just
they're having huge fires right now.
I was just listening to a case last night on a podcast, and it was on somebody when a fireman went in. They didn't know it was a body there, and he stepped where the body was. It was all burnt.
You can. I've been there on those. Wow. And I'll tell you, so some of the guests that I've had in the past, just real quick, I've had one of Ted Bundy's surviving victims from the Chi Omega sorority house. That's Kathy Kleiner. She's a sweetie. And I've had Gil Carrillo, like I said, from the Night Stalker. I'm going to have the lead negotiator from Waco. He's coming on in the near future, as well as Jeffrey Dahmer, lead detective. And that's not just murder. I mean, of course, murder's my thing, but it's not just murders. It's other things as well. From the other Waco, people that are movers and shakers.
The Branch Davidian ordeal?
Yeah, that's the Waco deal. Okay. So the lead negotiator, his name is Gary Nosner, and he's a friend of mine. He was, actually, the negotiators are actually from the FBI. Oh, okay. But it was ATF, where several of the ATF agents got killed during that warrant. But he's going to come on in the future, and it's just kind of wrangling some of these people. You know, Mark Lamb, he's one of the sheriffs in Arizona. He ran for U.S. Senate. He's agreed to come on, and Henry Lee, Dr. Henry Lee, I've messaged him. He's agreed to come on down the line, and you know, those are the kind of people that I really, really, I'm fascinated with their jobs, you know, and what I have found is that most people don't mind talking about what it is that they do, you know, especially if they're passionate about it.
Absolutely.
And so I'm sure you guys run across that a lot too, that most people want to talk about what they do, and they're excited about it. And so that's what's cool. It makes me a smarter person. As a matter of fact, the guy that I talked to today from the LA Fire Department, he's retired now, but I mean, I even landed him a speaking gig, you know, so I was so impressed with this guy. I was like, yeah, I think I know who to call to get you to speak somewhere.
Very cool.
You're that good.
Yeah. And people, I mean, like I said, it's good to have people that enthusiastic on what they do, you know, that they're really in the spot that they want to be. And, you know, it's good for everybody because then you get to hear that story.
And like you said, you get to learn something sometimes. And that's
knowledge is power.
It is.
Knowledge is power. And if you get to know people and you have people like that in your stable, I walked back up to work, and after talking to this guy, and one of my partners was like, what are you smiling about? And I'm like, I just met somebody on the phone that's going to make me better. And it's going to make everybody better.
Yeah.
And this is a guy that basically will review cases that involve fire deaths for free.
Wow.
He'll do it for free. And when you find people like that, that makes us all just that. What a resource.
Yeah.
And it's not like you can go to the yellow pages and find this guy.
Right.
You just have to dig and find. But listen, guys, I've loved it. It's great to talk to you both. And I hope that I can tell you're both smarter from this conversation. So
yeah, absolutely.
Definitely. Our inquisitive pants are shaking right now. That's it, man.
All right.
Well, hey, everybody.
All right, guys.
This is the Nonsense Chronicles. Blah, 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 blah. And thank you for joining us. Please like and subscribe, and we are out of here.
Later.
See ya.